Our first speaker, of course, is Fred Avestruz, batch 64B. Fred graduated from UP Diliman with a BS in Pre-Med. And in 1974, he finished his MBA, his master's in 1975, and PhD in economics in 1979. His doctoral dissertation, Risk and Technology Choice, which he wrote with able assistance of Brad Nonoy Navarrete, batch 71, as his statistical consultant, was published as a book by the University Press of America in 1985. He was senior advisor to the government of Vietnam in 1996 to 2001 under 2 ADB technical assistance grants. Capacity building at the Ministry of Planning and Investment, and support for decentralization and participation in planning. This was when his interest in Vietnam developed. He has taught at UP College of Business Administration, UP Los Baños, UP Visayas, and was Associate Dean at UP Cebu. He also taught at AIM in the US, at the City University of New York, and Fordham University. So before we start, welcomes everybody's Trends, Insights, and Development. This is our 10th edition. We would like to request everybody except the speaker to mute yourselves while the speaker is going to give his talk. So friends, Brad's family, let us now welcome our first speaker, Dr. Fred Avestruz, batch 64, who's going to talk to us about Vietnam's economic miracle. So Brad, Fred, you have the floor now.
Okay.
Share screen.
Yeah. Ay naman to.
Okay, the Brad.
Okay, ya. Tan pakai tiguang naman gud tabay.
Dili pa oy.
Okay. Na ba?
Yes, kita na yung screen, Brad.
Okay.
Right. It's not the screen. It's the speaker note. It's not the
okay. All
right.
right.
Not the slide.
Oops. Okay, sorry.
Lain
to di ay. Uy.
Okay. Notes na ni mo, Brad.
Okay. Uy. Ano man mo gawas? Yeah, I know. It's the same thing. Kadiyot lang, ha?
If you hover your mouse at taas, you'll see a screen share button. You have to hover it at the top of your screen first.
Stop, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. All right. Yep. Okay, I think I got it. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay.
That's it.
Full screen. Okay. All right.
That's good.
Okay, that's good. Okay. Gawas bang sound?
Yes, Brad. Okay, loud and clear na.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so good morning, good evening, everyone. So welcome to this Secrets of Vietnam's Economic Miracle, 35 years of reform. That means that 35 years or 30 years of what they did, we're going to do it in 30 minutes. That's a lot of things being packed up. Okay, now I will be presenting section by section, and I will pause for a few minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, prepare them after one section. After I get into a summary, I will open the floor for some questions. All right. Now, Vietnam, we'll be discussing the development of Vietnam with some statistics and data from the World Bank and other agencies. And we'll be using Philippine data as sort of a baseline to see the magnitudes, how big how the magnitude of what Vietnam has been doing. There are many similar things between Vietnam and the Philippines. One is the geographic land area. As we can see, Vietnam is somewhere here, and that's the Philippines. In terms of total land area, they're very similar, except that Vietnam is attached to the mainland of Asia, while the Philippines is an archipelago. In terms also of population, they're almost the same. Vietnam started out in 1992 with 71 million, while the Philippines only had 65 million in 1992. But the Philippines has a higher growth rate. So we ended up in 2019 with 109 million, while Vietnam from 1992 to 2019, 71 million, they ended up with 97 million. So we're about more than about 12% more than Vietnam. Vietnam also and the Philippines have similar post-colonial political economic regimes. So we had Vietnam was under the French for about 100 years until they kicked out the French in 1954, and the Philippines was under Spain for about 350 years and under the Americans for almost 50 years. Another similarity is that both countries in 1986, this is a significant year for both countries. 1986, the Philippines had a new constitution, new political regime, while Vietnam also in 1986 instituted drastic economic reforms. We'll talk about that. Actually, that's the beginning of their growth period, 1986. So in this presentation, we look at the following. What is Vietnam's economic miracle? Who are responsible for this economic miracle? How did they make this miracle happen? And then after that, we're going to look at challenges. Now that Vietnam is a middle income country, just like the Philippines, what challenges do they face to become a reach the high income status? And what lessons can other countries learn from Vietnam's experience? So let's dive into the first part. What is Vietnam's economic miracle? Well, the miracle is, first, Vietnam was able to lift 48 million of its population out of extreme poverty. That means that, well, in 1992, they had 52% of their population in extreme poverty. More than half of the people were in extreme poverty. In 2018, they only had 1.8% of their 97 million in extreme poverty. That's a very rapid decline, as you can see the trend line of their decline. The Philippines, on the other hand, we could see our poverty, the trend in our poverty. It has been almost constant until it went down in 2018. Well, it started to go down in 2015. So that's one of the significant things that they did. Just like China lifted about 800 million in their own context in terms of scale. They're bigger, but they did a lot of poverty alleviation. The second miracle I would consider is the increase in the standard of living of the population. Here we use the GDP, gross domestic product per capita, purchasing power parity, which actually reflects better the standard of living of the population. It means that everything, the GDP, everything that's produced, goods and services within the country, divide that by the number of people, the population, and then adjust that for the rate of different rates of inflation. So in 1990, Vietnam's GDP per capita purchasing power parity was about almost three times less than that of about 1/3, a little bit more than 1/3 of the Philippines. In 2019, they're now almost equal. And actually 2022, or this year, 2022, they will surpass the Philippines in terms of GDP per capita. The growth rate is 5.56. The Philippine growth rate is only 2.6. So that's also a miracle. Their increases in income were also distributed equitably as measured by the Gini coefficient or Gini index. Okay, the higher this index is, the more unequal the distribution of income is. Now, as you can see, the Philippines went up to about 47, and it's now 2018, it's down to 42.3. Vietnam's, on the other hand, is 35.7. It's been almost constant. So their income is better distributed. In other words, the poor is not that poor, okay? But in the Philippines, we have a large income gap. The rich are rich, the poor are poor, really poor. They are also able to provide employment to their people. So they have low unemployment rate. The red lines represent Vietnam. As you can see, our Philippine unemployment rate is up here. That's about 3.5, above 3.5. And Vietnam's is down to less than 2. Some years it goes up, but below 3. So in other words, the government was able to work it out to keep unemployment low. And while their unemployment was low, they were also able to protect their workers. This is measured by the Labor Freedom Index. In other words, Vietnamese workers were protected from being indiscriminate, unjustified firing, severance pay. So in other words, they had the government's protection. The higher this is, this index is, the better protection the workers have. So to summarize, Vietnam was able to lift about 48 million of its population out of extreme poverty in 26 years. Standard of living of the population increased 5 times in a period of 26 years. Distributed income equitably, unemployment was kept low, and they were able to protect their workers. Okay. Now, if anybody has any questions, we can pause for a few minutes. Otherwise, I will continue. Are there any questions? I see a hand raised. Anybody has a hand raised? No? Okay, so let's move on. Now, who are responsible for this economic miracle? Well, I would give credit first to the Communist Party of Vietnam, or in other words, who is or who are behind the government of Vietnam. It's a one-party system, so there's only one party. It's only the Communist Party. And to understand the Communist Party better, let's look at these some numbers here. The Communist Party of Vietnam has 55.2 million members. And every 5 years, they select 1,500 out of the 5.2 million and gather them into what they call the National Party Congress. The National Party Congress, so this meets once every 5 years, they select 150 to 170 members to form the Central Committee. And this is a powerful group of members. The Central Committee selects the 13-member Politburo. This varies from 13 to 17. These are the highest ranking members of the party. If you're in the Politburo, you're sikat in the party. And the Central Committee also selects the General Secretary and all the other, the Secretariat of the party. So, so the General Secretary is the most powerful person in the party. I think I said that already. Now the government, let's look at the government. Hold on, let me, oops. Okay, so at the national level, well, let's start with the National Assembly. The National Assembly has approximately 500 members. These members are elected by local voters. So they have, this is like their Congress. And the National Assembly elects their president. So the president is the head of state. And this happens every 5 years. And the president appoints the prime minister. Prime minister is the head of government. So the prime minister sort of runs the country. Under him would be the ministers, minister for infrastructure, minister of health, and so on. And then the president also appoints the chief justice of the Supreme Court. At the local level, also again, every 5 years, so they only have elections every 5 years. The constituents in the voters in the local level, this would be the province or the district, which is equivalent to the municipality and the cities. They elect the People's Committee. Now the People's, they elect the People's Council, which in turn elects the People's Committee. And the People's Committee elect among themselves the chairman of the People's Committee. The chairman is like the governor in our, so the system that they operate is what is called in Leninist term, democratic centralism. So what's democratic centralism? It's free critical thinking and debate before making decisions. So it's not a one-man rule or just a rule of very few people. Decisions are democratically made, leadership democratically elected, and decisions critically and democratically evaluated after an appropriate time after implementation. The centralist part is once decisions are made, they are implemented. Discussion, subordinate to action. Those who disagree do not block or undermine implementation. So there are no oppositions. Authority of democratically elected leaders is respected. So they made this system that they have seems to be efficient and effective. Now let's look at the leaders of the current leaders of Vietnam. The highest leader is, of course, the General Secretary. It's now Nguyen Phu Trong, and the General Secretary has a degree in history and philology, studied in the Soviet Union. The president is Nguyen Xuan Phuc, and he has a degree in economics, and he went to the National University of Singapore for economics management. The prime minister is Pham Minh Chinh, and he's an engineer, a civil engineer. He studied at Bucharest Civil Engineering of Technical University of Civil Engineering in Bucharest. So they've studied abroad. They're all had solid degrees and education. So to summarize, so it's the Communist Party that provides the political stability, consistency of policies, and continuity of programs and projects. Then the government, which we can characterize as efficient and effective. And the third one, which we will discuss in the next section, is the Ministry of Planning and Investment of Vietnam. This body plans planned the reforms and manage the economic miracle. Are there any questions at this point? Shall we go on? Okay, so let's continue. So how do they make this economic miracle happen? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it started in 1986 in what they call the Doi Moi economic reform. Doi Moi literally means change, new change. Doi is change, Moi is new. So they say Chok Mong Na Moi, Happy New Year. And which is also, they're now celebrating that, the Tet. So what was the Doi Moi reform? After the reunification in 1975, where they drove out the Americans out of the country, they started to rebuild their country, rebuild their economy. But they were so dependent, they were closed. I mean, they traded only, operated only with the communist bloc countries, Russia or Soviet Union, China, Cuba, and all the other Soviet communist countries at that time. And they operated under some kind of a Leninist economic system where it's centrally planned. They tell everybody, all the provinces, the districts, what they need to produce, the targets that they have to produce of different products. But that thing failed. Obviously, there was no incentive on the part of workers. There was corruption going on all over. And in 1978, they occupied, or they had a war with Cambodia, and this made the Chinese unhappy, and so the Chinese cut off their aid to Vietnam. And so they were struggling, and the Soviet Union also at that time was struggling. They had their own problems. So they were left, people were starving in Vietnam. And this was also a time in 1986 when the conservative leader, Le Duan, died. He was the general secretary, and he was replaced by Nguyen Van Linh, a reformist. So they started the reform. And this was the start of Doi Moi in 1986. And they called their system the socialist-oriented market economy. So it is not an economy managed according to style of centralized bureaucratic. So they allowed some private sector, free market, and they liberalized, they opened the country. They opened the country for foreign investments. In fact, one of the first laws that passed in 1986 was the law on foreign investments, and they've been frequently updating that. And so they invested in human, physical infrastructure and focused on sustainable reform. So now let's look at the Ministry of Planning and Investment. Before 1995, there was the State Planning Commission, or the SPC, and the SCCI, State Committee for Cooperation and Investment. They merged in 1995, they merged these two entities to form the Ministry of Planning and Investment. So this ministry plans the modernization of Vietnam, and they had management authority. In other words, they had authority over all the different ministry, infrastructure, tourism, health, and so on when it comes to economic matters. When we were there, if somebody from MPI, Ministry of Planning and Investment, goes to the province or to any ministry, they would all salute to them. They were the authority over all these other units. They were like Gestapo of economic reform. In 1995, they formed the MPI, but they didn't know what the staff, the officers of MPI didn't really know what market economy is, because they were used to central planning. So they went to ADB, Asian Development Bank, and asked for technical assistance. So ADB sent out a fact-finding mission, exactly what needs to be done, and came out with a request for proposals. And I was at that time with Asian Institute of Management, and we submitted a proposal, and they came up with a short list. So AIM was shortlisted, Harvard Institute for International Development was shortlisted, and the third on the shortlist was Netherlands Economics Institute, NEI. And AIM got the project. So we started preparing for the project, and I was the team leader of the project. So we went to Vietnam in June of 1996. The project was called Capacity Building at the Ministry of Planning and Investments. And this was followed in 2000 with support for decentralization and participation of planning. So that's our team: Mario Lamberte, Bruce Tolentino, Manny Gaspay, and so forth. Okay, so we followed AIM's template for training. So we had those who have been to AIM, what we call a case room. So we built a case room, in fact, two, one in Da Nang and one in Hanoi, to do the training. Some of the workshops were done in hotels. These were for the high-level officials that we trained. They wanted a 4-star hotel for their training, so we gave them that. And these were some of the participants. Number one participant was, as we can see, Nguyen Ngoc San is the chairman of the People's Committee. So he's the governor, and he has his directors of the different departments: finance, construction, industry, trade. So this was a two-day training for this high-level officials. So we did a lot of things. We had study tours. We had out-of-country training programs. They participated. We sent 10 people for master's degrees. Some went to AIM, others to one of them went to Williams College in Massachusetts, and others at in the Netherlands, the International Institute of Social Studies. And some of them also attended short courses at AIT, Australia, and so on. So this was the evaluation of this project was highly satisfactory. We can go back to this if there's any interest. Now, before we go on, are there any questions at this point? Okay, so I'll continue. One of the first thing they did was decide on what strategy to do, strategy to use to develop. Well, they had high unemployment in '86. There was no job. They didn't have the technology. They didn't have the capital. So just like what Singapore and China did, they went after foreign direct investments, FDIs, to provide them with the capital, the technology, and management skills. And what the FDIs produced, they were exported. So balance of payments were improved. Workers were getting higher wages. And other industries linked to the FDIs improved, developed. They also looked at the negative impacts and tried to minimize this. Okay, so one of the, well, in other countries, FDIs are not welcomed as much as in Vietnam and other countries, because they had, or they have domestic industries which have to be protected from the competition. But Vietnam did not have domestic industries that would that the FDIs would compete, so they had no problem with that. And they checked on the environmental aspects and so on. So they made sure all of this were taken care of. Now, so they also noted the conditions that would attract FDIs: high quality of labor, low wages, low corporate taxes, good infrastructure, availability of domestic credit, political stability, and favorable socioeconomic conditions, and growing domestic market. So let's look at how Vietnam attracted the FDIs. As a note, we could see that the latest count here, I think this was 2020, total FDIs in Vietnam went up to 318.7 billion US dollars. And you can compare that with the Philippines with 79 billion. So quite a big difference, despite the fact that they were behind us in the start. And this is the pattern of their FDIs. The red line again is Vietnam, the blue is the Philippines. So as you can see, their FDI inflows is going up very fast. In 2019 alone, Vietnam had 16 billion, while Philippines had 8 billion, only half of what Vietnam was getting. So how did Vietnam attract foreign direct investments? First thing they did was develop their human resource. So education and health were the key factors. And as you can see, the government expenditure as a percentage of GDP compared to the Philippines, which is blue, their investment in education is very much larger. They went up as high as more than 5.5% of their GDP, while the Philippines hovers around less than 3%. So invested a lot more. And they also invest on health. As we can see, this is their expenditure on health as a percentage of GDP. 5.92%. Philippines only has 4.4%. They have 2.6 hospital beds per 1,000 of their population, 2.6 times more than the Philippines. And the number of hospitals, mostly government, public hospitals, while Philippines has mostly private hospitals. Vietnam is a socialist country, so we could expect government to be doing more. They have more doctors, 8 doctors per 10,000 and only 6 per 10,000 in the Philippines. They also do a lot more of the inoculation, immunization. As you can see, the red hovers above the blue. So that took care of their human resources. And let's see what happened to their human resources. So Vietnam has a labor force of 57.3 million, while the Philippines has a labor force of only 45. So despite the fact that the Philippines has a larger population, Philippines has a lower labor force because in Vietnam, the female labor force participation rate is very much higher. 77% out of every 100 females in the working age group participate in the labor force, while in the Philippines, it's only 60 out of 100. That should explain the larger labor force that they have. Their Vietnamese also have, they have lower literacy rate, but it's catching up fast with the Philippines. And in terms of education, in fact, the PISA, the international tests, they score in the top 10. I think they're number 8 with China, Singapore in the top 10 on science and math. So they're putting very much emphasis in education. Their IQ, average IQ of Vietnamese is 94, and Philippines has an average IQ of 86. They're healthy. Life expectancy is 75, Philippines 71. So you can see that in terms of attractiveness of labor here, they have educated and healthy workers. Minimum wage is lower, 5.6, $7.3 in the Philippines. And in terms of taxes, tax rate is 20. The average ASEAN wage taxes, corporate tax rate is 23. So they're below the ASEAN average. And Philippines, you can see, is a 30% tax rate. And here also, the overall tax rates is commercial, the percentage of commercial profits is higher in the Philippines than in Vietnam. So they've brought down their taxes. If you, Singapore, on the other hand, if you listen to Lee Kuan Yew, he started out with 0 taxes for FDIs, just to make sure that his people had worked, had employment. Infrastructure, they have expressway length, 1,276 kilometers. Expressway length in the Philippines is 420 kilometers. Ports, they have more containers. In 2019, 13.6 million containers. Philippines had 8.98 containers. Broadband is also higher. Subscription in thousands. Okay. Now, domestic credit, this is one of the requirements also of FDIs, that they can borrow on a short-term basis from the banks. They bring in their capital, but they need the short-term capital. So again, banks here, they lend more compared to the Philippines, 130.72% of GDP. We only have 47.7 in the Philippines. As a percentage of bank deposit, they have 676% of credits of the deposits. Assets, also larger assets. This includes the loans, of course. And the bank lending deposit interest rate spread is also narrower in Vietnam. In other words, interest rates would tend to be lower on loans and higher on savings compared to what we have in the Philippines. Political stability, Philippines is relatively more unstable. The higher the points here, the more stable. So 2.5 is the strongest, negative 2.5 is the weakest. So we're in the negative, and Vietnam is on the on the positive. So they have a more stable, politically, they're more politically stable. Political conditions, also fragile state. The Philippines is more fragile. You can read later on this. And we're also, Philippines is more prone to external intervention. Vietnam has a lower external intervention index. So that means that they're more independent, less influence. And corruption has been more or less the same as in the Philippines. Some years corruption went higher than in the Philippines than in Vietnam. So there is corruption, definitely, but we can talk about corruption later, maybe in the Q&A. They don't have that much corruption in terms of public funds. Corruption usually is with the businessmen, and they try to extort businessmen. Public service index, the higher this is, this means the essential services, health, education, water, sanitation, and so on. The Philippines, Vietnam is able to provide all these services to their people well. So it's going down, so they're doing better than they do in the Philippines. Homicide, Philippine homicide is 8.9 per 100,000. Vietnam has 1.5 per 100,000. So it's safer to walk around the streets in Vietnam, or, there is less homicide. Business freedom index, again, a little bit higher. So they're doing pretty well. Now, are there questions on FBIs? Go ahead. Questions? No questions. I'll continue to the next part. So another strategy that they, yes, go ahead.
Do they consider ambulant peddlers, which are mostly women, part of their labor force?
Well, if they're yes, that's part of the, I think that's part of the labor force. They're working. They're, when you ask them, are you working? They would say yes.
Oh, okay.
So are they looking for work? So if they're not looking for work, then they are not unemployed. So those are the two questions. Are you in the labor force? I mean, are you in a position to work? And are you looking for work? If they're not looking for work, then they're not unemployed, but they're in the labor force. Okay?
Probably that's the reason why they have more females than the Philippines. Female workers.
Maybe they have more.
Because you see a lot of ambulant workers in the streets.
Yes. Maybe that's they're part of the participate. So
Question.
what? Yeah, go ahead.
Here in the Philippines, who are considered underemployed?
Okay, underemployed. Technically, underemployment is when you are working, but you still want to work. In other words, you're only employed half a day, and you're at the other half of the day you're not employed. So you look for the other half. That's considered to be underemployed. There's another category.
Yeah.
When you are, and it's called malemployed. This came up in 2008 because a lot of people who became unemployed, they went into employment for a lower category type of work. So they are called malemployed. So you have engineers who become sanitation workers. Okay, and you have doctors who become lab technicians, or what do you call that? They work as nurses. So a lot of the Filipinos, Filipino doctors, some Filipino doctors in the in the US are mal-employed because they're not doing the potential
Yeah.
of what they can. Okay.
Yeah, Fred, more questions.
Yes, yeah.
In the Philippines, I think even what your carboys or vendors are included in the underemployed.
Yes, yes. They probably, if they're looking for work, if they're satisfied with what they're doing, then they're employed. They are not unemployed. Only if
Yeah,
they're looking.
They're not looking for employment, but they are
Okay.
what your carboy vendors,
Yeah.
and in 1 year at one point the administration put them under as underemployed. Of course, increase the employment rate so that our employment rate will look better.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
in other countries, they are called unemployed.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions for now? So
Question
can
in the
we
chat.
Question.
anything typed in the chat? Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead ba? Yeah. I've been to Vietnam thrice. One thing I kadong
Moraga choppy ang sound.
Yeah, there's somebody talking at the background, no?
Please mute yourself if you're not on the. Go ahead, Don.
One thing I noticed ba kanang gingon nimo, is it a cultural thing kay sa Vietnam? I passed like 2 construction site, mga babae may magtrabaho mag-arsa og mga sako ba? As in, dili nga sako nga kanang semento, smaller ba, but I was there last 2020 ba mga February niya. Believe ko sa mga babae dito mo may mga arsa og sako ba. Wa kita na dinhi sa kon. It's a cultural thing sa ilahang murag equal ang kuan.
Equal.
So you notice mo grabe ang ilahang participation sa labor force sa babae ba?
Equal sila. Not only that, sa India po ba? Sa India ang mga arga nga to babae. Ang mga laki magtanaw lang. So yeah, that's part of the kuan. So I think cultural na. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for now? So we'll
There are in the
continue.
chat. Dad, there are in the
Sorry.
chat. I can read them to you.
Which one?
So one question is from Nikki Torres. From what countries do FDIs come from?
Okay. All right. So FDIs, the largest and one of the first FDIs in well, I think the largest country that sends direct investments is South Korea. So when I was there in 1996, there was already some LG was already there, and then the one of the best hotels. Well, it's not the best; it's about 4-star. Was Daewoo Hotel. So there's a lot of Korean, and then they're all over Singapore, U.S., American companies. Ford was already there. Ford Motors. And then from China, they have a lot of Chinese investments there. Yeah, electronics. So there are other countries there that most countries, a lot of countries, they choose Vietnam. So because especially when the U.S.-China rivalry got more intense and the trade war started, investors, FDIs in China moved to Vietnam because there was no trade sanctions from Vietnam. So they did their production in Vietnam. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay.
I could read another question from Mark. Is it possible that, I think this was sort of briefly discussed already, but is it possible that the bookkeeping is more accurate in Vietnam than in the Philippines in terms of accuracy of the data that you showed?
Oh, these are international World Bank, UN data that that I'm presenting here. So I guess they would have more or less the same accuracy, the same level of accuracy. Any other questions?
Fred,
There's
do
a,
you have hunger rates graph?
Which one? Which graph?
Yeah, in hunger.
Oh, the first one, extreme poverty.
Yeah, sorry, I was late. No.
Yes, go ahead. Okay lang. Okay, extreme poverty. Go ahead.
Yeah, let's look at
so
right,
they
because
now have.
the poverty is used to be Vietnam very high.
Oh
But,
yeah.
now
Yes.
we've overtaken. No?
Yes, they have only 1.8% extreme poverty, and we have 2.7, and our population is higher. So this is 2.7 of 200 of 100. How many we have? 111 million, and this is 1.8 of 97 million. So in terms of numbers, we have almost twice as much as they have. Well, not twice, but between 1.5 and
Yeah.
twice.
NEDA here in Philippines give out hunger rates, like they're how much population says they were not able to eat in a day, something like that.
Yeah. Yes, I heard that. Yeah, I heard that. That's another statistic. This is the UN. They use $1.90 per day. It used to be $1 per day, but you can't live with $1 per day nowadays. So they raised it to 1.9. So that's the extreme poverty. So these are below the $1.9 per day. So this is really extreme poverty. 1.9 is about less than 100 pesos. Less than 100 pesos a day. So this is individual. So that means if you have a family of 4, you need 4 times this amount. Okay, and you would still be in extreme poverty. So that's how they measure this. All right. Any other questions before we move on?
Fred.
Hi, Leo. Oh, yeah.
I was just wondering. I listened to the thing about health. I noticed there were 190 something private hospitals.
Yeah.
Who is that? I mean, it's supposed to be socialist. I would expect the socialist thing to have no private.
Oh, hospitals.
Unless those are foreign investments.
No. 100. Vietnam has 182 private. No, they're open to private enterprises. Yeah, there's a lot of private enterprises there, including hospitals, doctors, and so on. They operate privately. It's not totally health. It's not totally government.
Because here in the Netherlands, the hospitals are all, what's it now? They are all privately run but publicly financed.
Yeah.
So there are no real private hospitals.
Yeah.
In the Netherlands. So I was expecting that Vietnam should be sort of like that. In other words, because health gets subsidy for all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is channeled through through hospitals. And therefore, if you have private, you have a question of how much do you give to the private from central health funds. and that could be very problematic sometimes in other countries. That's why I found it a good idea here in the Netherlands that there are no real private hospitals.
Yeah, yeah.
They're all public in a sense because they are publicly funded but privately run. They
Yes.
have boards of directors that are private, which can make their own decisions.
Yeah.
But they don't have stockholders. They don't have stuff like that. So
Yes.
I'm still sort of a bit scandalized by the private hospital. I mean, that's different from small clinics doing very specialized things. But this is hospitals. Are these big?
Yes. Sorry?
Are these big hospitals?
No, well, some of them probably I have not at that time, 1996, I have not seen this private hospitals. I only go to the international doctors hospital clinics, which my insurance covered, but I have not seen the Vietnamese private hospitals. They probably probably most of this came about lately after 2008, and they found it profitable to put up hospitals, especially for foreigners and so on, and also wealthy Vietnamese. There are about 6 billionaires in Vietnam now, 6 or 9, but this is a growing number of billionaires. Dollars, not dong, not pesos. Okay, all right. So can we continue? Can we continue and move on?
Please do.
Okay. Yes. Otherwise, sobrang na 10 o'clock. The next thing that they did, other than the FDIs, was export promotion. Well, actually, one of the first things they did was Vietnam is an agricultural country. So they improved their agriculture. They improved the production of their agriculture. They, instead of having, purely collectivized, communist style of agriculture production, they allowed some private, sort of private agriculture operations. So in other words, people were given plots of land. All the land actually is owned by the government. So you only get a lease, or you get assigned a certain plot of land, and you, with your products, you pay for the land, and then any excess you sell in the market. So that's why they were able early on to export agricultural products. But as they moved on, their manufacturing, they focused on manufacturing. They improved their manufacturing, and they were able to export a lot. So that in 2012, they already had a surplus, trade surplus. In other words, they exported more than what they imported. So they were self-sufficient. Now, you compare that with the Philippines, we're always down here. We were always in deficit. We were buying more outside than what we sell. Okay, and they were able to do this. So one of the things that they did was to join the free trade agreements. So they have the ASEAN. They joined ASEAN, I think, in 1998 or earlier than that. With Japan and then Korea. So they had a lot of EU, they have a lot of trade agreements. So in other words, these were trade with low tariffs or zero tariffs in some cases. So this was some of the things that they did as far as exports, and they're relying heavily on exports. Well, exports bring in the foreign exchange. They provide employment to the workers. But what they exported were products. And however, in the Philippines, what we export are people. we send them as OFWs. They don't do that. What they export as products, and so that it has a higher multiplier effect. Although OFWs send remittances, but the multiplier effect is very, very much smaller than export production. So as a summary, three things that they did was they opened the economy in 1986 under the Doi Mo economic reform, and then they attracted foreign investments and they promoted their exports. Okay. Now let's go to their to the challenges, the threats. Well, just like China, South Korea, and Japan, and many European countries, there is what is called the demographic challenge. This is Vietnam's demographic pyramid. And you will notice here that 20 below the age group 20 to 24, they now have fewer workers in their or fewer in their population, fewer number in their population. And this is because in the 1980s, the government came up with a two-child policy. So it's several conditions. So if you had more than 2 children, the third one you don't get any benefits, or if you're a party member, you get punished. Not necessarily fiscal. You could be you could be stripped of several privileges. You could be fired for having more children than what is prescribed. On the other hand, we could see the Philippines has a large, the 20 to 24 age group. That's wider. So we are assured of more workers. On the other hand, Vietnam, in about 15 years, they will have fewer workers and more people with their higher life expectancy. They will have more retired people in their population. The other factor is their dependency on China. This is for their FDIs. Exports. I'm sorry. This is their exports. But almost 30% of their exports go to China, so they were very much dependent on China. And also for FDIs, they have about 30% of their FDIs from China, and they also have about 30% of their tourists coming from China, and they have a large tourism industry. The third is what is called the middle income trap. So when countries go through the middle income stage, okay, they reach this level because of the increase in the productivity of their workers. But there gets the point where productivity starts to slow down. Where productivity comes from innovation. In other words, you're improving the process, and so the workers become more productive, and that increases incomes and increases growth. But when innovation starts to slow down, the growth process also slows down. So what is needed is really more and more innovation. So this is the innovation index of Singapore. Vietnam is down here, and down here is the Philippines. Now they're increasing. This is Singapore's research and development expenditure as a percentage of GDP, pretty high. Vietnam is down there, but as you can see, the trend is they're increasing their R&D expenditure. So they're sort of taking care of this. And probably the fourth would be, a fourth challenge would be trade sanctions if they continue to have a lot of trade surpluses with the US. So right now, after the trade war with China, US trade war, the exports shifted to Vietnam. or US imports shifted to Vietnam. So that gave Vietnam a lot of surplus, and the US has been warning about this. Okay, so summary of challenges. No, I forgot to mention artificial intelligence, but let's go through this. Demographic challenge, dependence on China, middle income trap, and artificial intelligence. And this is really a big challenge with low wage countries wherein wages are increasing because most of the work now are being done by robots. So pretty soon they would not really need low wage workers. Okay, so as a summary, what Vietnam has done is really just what China, Singapore, and a lot of other countries have done. And so there are several economic miracles in Asia in the last few decades. South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, China, and now Vietnam. Now, what is common with these countries? So all of these countries had stable, not revolving door governments. In other words, the government stays there. The Vietnamese Communist Party has been there for a long time. It's not going away soon. China's Communist Party has been there. They're not going away very soon. On the other hand, we have, like in the Philippines, we change government every 6 years. So that provides instability. And also, they can formulate long-term plans and implement long-term plans. On the other hand, the Philippines were limited to a 6-year plan or 5-year plan, because beyond that, we don't know what's going to happen with the new president. And also, they created strong planning and economic development ministries. So we have the Ministry of Planning and Investments in Vietnam, National Development and Reform Commission of China, Economic Planning Board of South Korea, and the Singapore Economic Development Board. There's a discussion about this in my paper on decoupling economic development from politics. Then they had one of the main motivation they had was the eradication of poverty. Park Chung-hee said when he started his power that the three most the three enemies are: number one was poverty, second was corruption, third was communism. So poverty was always number one, and even Lee Kuan Yew, number one was always poverty. Then they invested in human resources, infrastructure, and then they developed their exports and foreign investments. They maintained independence, and before their takeoff, they had their people they suffered brutal wars, starvation, or racial turmoil, such as in Malaysia and Singapore. Okay, so large country, small country with population of 2 million, 5 million now, Singapore. Large country, China, 1.4 billion. Vietnam, 98 million. They all were able to do it. The same process, the same formula. So size does not matter. Thank you for staying with me up to this point.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Brad Fred, for that very interesting talk. Guess we're
late.
Yes, we'll leave the questions first for after the second speaker.